Hello and welcome to another session on Oracle Applications Training. In this session I'm going to talk about the inventory module. In particular, I'm going to cover several of the inventory inquiries where you can look up various aspects of items, their item quantities, their item relationships, their item transaction information. Cover as much as I can here. This could take a little while, so let's get started. The first thing I want to cover is receiving transactions. Of course, this is involved in purchasing, where you make purchases and then you receive them to your receiving dock, and you need to be able to look up the history of those receiving transactions. You would go to Inventory, Transactions, Receiving, and then open the View Receiving Transactions form. There are many ways to look this up. You can look it up by supplier site. You can look it up based on a specific work order. You can also go down and look it up by item. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you by item. And here we see the different receipt headers for that particular item, along with supplier site information, and any source or shipment number, ship date information that might be relevant. You can drill down deeper into these receipts by going to the transactions form. In here you can see the different transactions that took place during the receipt. In a typical Oracle receipt, there is a receiving transaction that takes place, and then there is a deliver transaction. Now you can set up your receipts to be direct, and as soon as you do the receipt you can deliver it into your inventory. But even if you do that, it still performs two transactions in the background, the receipt and the delivery. In your receiving transactions form, you can also find other information, and it can be added via the folder tools. For instance, if we want to show the sub-inventory that this material was delivered to, we can do so. And also show the location or locator. If that's a locator controlled sub-inventory, the locator would show up here as well. So here's all the different information that you can find regarding a receipt in the receipt transaction summary. Alright, that covers the receiving transactions. Let's go into some other transactions. Let's look at some material transactions. The material transactions in the transaction summary forms are a bit intermixed. For instance, if I were to go to the transaction summaries form, take out that date, put in my item, it would show me all summarized transactions for that item all the way to this particular date. So if I hit summarize, and that query takes a little bit of time because there's a lot of transactions against this particular item. Then here we can see all the different transactions, all the different transaction types, miscellaneous issues, miscellaneous receipts. Those are not typical transactions. Here's a PO receipt. And now I can go into the transaction details for that particular item. And if I go into the transaction details, that is the equivalent of going to the material transactions. So if I go to this form, I see that I'm in the material transactions form. So I could have gotten to this same information by going directly to material transactions. And by going through the material transactions, I can specify with a lot more detail than I would in the transaction summary the query that I'm trying to run. And the reason I explain this is because if you're trying to do different inventory inquiries, while the transaction summary is a quick and easy way to find the information, the material transactions are going to show you more detail. So you need to think about that when you're assessing your different inquiries into inventory. And of course, while we're at our material transactions form, we can see quite a bit of the different available information. Always transaction type is a good tab to go to because it gives you the detail that most people are looking for when they're looking at transactions. We can see that the transaction that we drilled down into was a PO receipt, so consequently our sources are going to be purchase orders, and here are the purchase order numbers, and of course our PO transaction receipt was the transaction type. If I needed to drill down even further, I can also go to the distributions screen, and typically you don't go this far unless you're a cost accountant, because what you're trying to discern here is for the different PO receipt, what were the different accounts that were touched. And if you go to type, you can see that in this case there was a purchase price variance. In this case, it's inventory valuation. We see some overhead absorption, and we see some clearing. And that makes a lot of sense to a cost accountant, so I'm not going to go into great detail here. I'll have other training sessions covering cost accounting later on. So that covers the different types of material transactions and transaction summaries that you can get to. And again, here is the summaries inquiry form. Again, very sparse versus the material transaction form, which gives you much more detail. I often get asked for transaction reports out of Oracle, and what I typically recommend is going to the material transactions form and putting in the specific information. Say for instance you wanted to find all the transactions that took place over a particular month of time. It's easy to select those dates, put in your item, and do a find, and then this shows you all the different transactions. And at this point I can do a file export, and I can export all the detail of that particular transaction records into an Excel spreadsheet. And it's bringing up Excel. Let's see. Say yes here, and here's all the different information. And of course, if I select this, double click this, and that sizes all of my columns accordingly. So this is a very good way to get reporting information out of Oracle without having to do a report. Very handy tool, exporting row information out of row and column information out of Oracle into Excel. Okay, that covers our material transactions. I want to talk a little bit about material distributions. Again, this is something that is more typical to cost accountants. So you would set up your date range for this particular inquiry. I guess since it's today, I need to leave it at that. Put in my particular item. Lost the item out of my clipboard. Alright, let's try another item. There we go. Alright, so a lot of what you see here you could have seen via the material transactions and drilling down into distributions. The good thing about this particular form is it'll take you directly to the distributions. So this is a form that I highly recommend to cost accountants if they're trying to drill down and find out information about particular transactions. It does give you enough detail to usually get to what you're looking for, because you can search by transaction type and source type and accounting type as well. So again, this is a very, very good tool for cost accountants to drill down into the different types of material distribution transactions that take place in Oracle. Alright, so that covers our material distributions. Now let's look at some more common types of inquiries that we would do in Oracle. Under on-hand availability, we can go into our on-hand quantity. This is one of the most common queries that you'll see in Oracle inventory. And here again we can put in our item. Capture that to my clipboard so I could use that later. And if I wanted to restrict this inquiry, I can add more information. For instance, if I only wanted to see material and finished goods, then I could put in that particular sub-inventory, put in the item, and it will combine that search. If I do a find, I can see that I do have some material there, and it looks like I have one. So let's just say I wanted to expand that a bit. I could take out that sub-inventory and do another find, and now I see I have 741. So those are separated, of course, by sub-inventory, but it's only showing me on one line. So I'd really like to see that broken down. So if I come back and I check my detail box and then do a find, I see it broken down by sub-inventory. So what I get a lot from my different clients that use Oracle is that they almost always check this box. And if that is the case, then I highly recommend that you put in a personalization to default that check into the box every time, because it's something that most people would want to use. So if you get an opportunity, go to the forms personalizations documents that I have on my website. It will cover the information on how you would default that particular checkbox so that it'll stay that way all the time. Alright, if we come back into our material workbench, with the new R12 features we can do a few different things. For instance, if we wanted to do some sorts, this little button here allows us to switch from ascending to descending. Of course, you can do the same as well with your sub-inventories. And if we had different items here, you could do it by item as well. Again, this is a good way of getting on-hand quantity information sorted the way you want, and then once you do, you can do a file export. Oops, you can't do an export out of this program anymore. I'm not sure why Oracle did that. Okay, well, I'll have to research that a bit and come back to it. And if we wanted to see availability, see that we have 325 on hand in that particular sub-inventory, we can go to our availability form, and it shows us that all 325 are available to reserve and available to transact. So there are no current reservations on that particular item, which is also good information to know. Alright, next I want to talk about our supply demand. Again, this is, aside from on-hand quantity, one of the most used inquiries that you would see in Oracle inventory. So we would put in our item, do a find, and what we see here is that we have a current on hand of 641. This is within all of our sub-inventories. Now there are obviously some reservations against that because there's only 510 that are available. And what this form is showing us is essentially a planning type of view of material requirements, demand, and supply in a date sorted order. So if there's any demand, and demand is always indicated by a negative in front of the number, so we've got move order demand versus move order supply, and it keeps a running tally of those quantities. So we can go down through time here, and we can see the different types of supply. Like here's a PO requisition, here's a PO order that are supplying and adding to this available quantity. And if we keep going further down, we'll see different sales orders that are taken away from this supply. And if we go even further, we can get into an area here where the demand has outpaced our supply. So here was our available quantity as of May 2011, and then on the 19th we have to deliver an order that is going to consume all of that supply and leave us short a fair amount of material. So if I don't use my planning system and get some more supply down into these dates, then it's telling me that I'm going to run short. So again, the item supply demand form is very useful to planners. Gives them a quick look into the future for any particular item and lets you know its availability. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, it's not used so much, but it's a very handy form, is the reservations form. Basically tells you what material has been reserved to different demand. I can put in an item. I can say I only want to look at I can look at supply, but typically I would look at demand, and usually I'm interested in sales order demand. So if I look at my reservations, I want to find all reservations against sales orders, then I can find. Alright, and then here's all of my sales order demand that has reserved material and the different quantities of material that it's reserved. And again, it lets me know that based on this particular demand, here's my quantities, quantity available, quantity ordered. I can also go to my supply tab and I can see if there's any particular supply that it has pegged to this demand. In this case, I'm seeing a lot of staging sub-inventories, so more than likely these items have been picked and staged for shipment, and that's why typically see a staging sub-inventory in my supply column. So it's very important to note here that these are reservations. This is material that has been selected by the system to ship for that particular demand. There's always a lot of discussion between what's a hard reservation, what's a soft reservation, what's an allocation, what's pegging, and I'm going to cover a lot of that material in a later video, but right now I'm just going to say that there are two things to consider in Oracle. Reservations are typically, not always, but typically hard reservations. Material that has been deemed necessary for shipment to fulfill an order. Reservations can be removed from order management, and you can also remove reservations from this form as well. But those are considered hard reservations. Pegging is something that a term that you hear in planning quite often. Pegging is absolutely not reservations. Pegging is the system's best guess at how it can fulfill demand with supply. So when people say an item is pegged to a sales order, then that means that particular item's on-hand quantity is pegged to the sales order. Should another sales order come in line in front of it and need that material, the planning system would repeg that material to the earliest sales order. Planning system's always trying to fulfill as best it can the demand that's coming through your order management system. So big difference between pegging. Pegging is not allocations. Pegging is not reservations. So keep that in mind, and I'll discuss that in more detail later on. Another very useful inquiry is the organization items inquiry. And here you could put in your item and find a particular item, and you could go through its different item attributes. These item attributes affect the different modules, and that's why you see the different module tabs across the top. You have quite a few. You can go out here quite a ways and see the different information. Another way to look at this information is using this folder button here, where you can see the information laid out in columns as opposed to tabs. And you're probably saying, well, there's a lot more attributes than what this is showing me. But to get each of the different attributes up here, you have to go to your folder menu and do show fields. In this case, let's say we were interested in some of the time attributes. We could run our query this way, and let's say we wanted to look at our processing lead times, and there our processing lead times are laid out this way. Now you're probably saying, well, for one item that's not particularly useful. So you could go back to your query form here, delete out our item, and let's come to our category set. And for our category set, let's look at inventory items. And for our category, we're going to choose computers and desktop. So now my query is based on a group of items that is associated with this category set and category. So if I find that, then I can see there are many, many items. Here's my different processing lead times. So this is very useful if you have groups of items that are managed by categories and you wanted to change a particular item attribute. For instance, let's look at another item attribute called buyer. Try that again. Default buyer. Alright, so if that buyer was responsible for all of these items, then I could come in here and I could make that change. There's a nice shortcut key called a Shift F5 that I could use here. And I could come down and use it here, arrow down, and here as well. And basically allows me to set that default buyer for all those items in that particular category. So it's a very fast way of getting that data updated, as opposed to going into the typical form that we see when we open up our organization items. And just to show you that it did make the update, even though I haven't saved it yet, I can go to the purchasing tab and we can see that our default buyer is there. Also switch back to my column view and see that my changes are still intact. Then I could just save those changes, and then those changes are recorded in the database. So that's a very handy, very quick way of using the organization item screen to update data and to query data. The next inquiry form that we can have a look at is our item relationships. And if I put in my item, do a find, here are the different item relationships. Now, these relationships are what I would call, or what they are order management relationships. For instance, for this particular item, I can have what's called an upsell. So if I was a customer service representative and I was working with a customer on the phone and they were interested in this particular item, but they weren't quite sure about its capacity to perform the functions, I could offer an upsell, an upgrade of that particular item, and so they can get a better product that might meet their needs. I also have cross-sell opportunities where I can say that, okay, I can sell you this item, but it's not available, but I can make this item available via cross-sale. I also have superseded, and I believe if you look in the list, you also have, well, quite a few. You'll have to work with your order management people on those. We also have substitute. I see that one used quite often. So those are your different item relationships that you can establish for an item to link them to other items in your inventory. Right. Now let's talk about item search. Okay, in item search, you have the ability to put in, of course, an item and click the show quantity field or button or checkbox, do a find, and we can see this information. Okay, that's basically the same information you could have found using the on-hand quantity inquiry. So why is this particular inquiry any more important than that one? Well, usually if I'm using an item search, I'm looking at the different relationships, cross-references, different catalogs for a particular item. For instance, if this item had a catalog associated with it, I could come to that catalog and I can see what catalog is associated with it. And it looks like somebody's been fooling around because obviously our desktop is not a mug. But let's just go at this search from a different angle. Let's just say I wanted to find information regarding a catalog and find all the items associated with it. So I could go back to my Find screen, take out my item. I want to look at catalogs. In this case, I want to look at mugs. And anywhere where the material is glass. And then do a find. And I can see that there are two items that are associated with that particular catalog group. So what this form gives you the ability to do is to do a very specific, very refined search on items. I could also change this and I could look up item categories. And if you recall from our last item category set, let's see, I could go to inventory items and I could look up my computer family, desktop class, do a find on that, and see that there's one item that fits that particular category set. I could also come back in and I could change this, and I could say, let's look up, instead of desktop, let's look at handheld computing devices, and do a find on that. In this case, it didn't find any records, but I hope you see the point here is that what I'm trying to do is find lists of items that pertain to different cross-references, item relationships, categories, and such. I've never tried the purchasing details. That's a different one. This is handy. It can find different items that are associated with suppliers. Now, I haven't tried this query before, so I'm stepping into some untested ground. So it's probably not going to find anything, but we'll give it a shot. No, it didn't. But if you had suppliers that were linked to items, then you could use this form to locate them as well. And that's not something that you can do in the org items form quite as easily. So I think the item search is kind of an unused and often forgotten form in Oracle, but is very, very handy. Okay, that covers all the inquiries that I wanted to show you today. I know that was a lot to go through, but those are some very, very handy inquiries. I'm going to have a lot more information on Oracle Inventory. It's a very, very deep module, so there's many things to cover. And so look forward in the future to seeing things about cycle counting and inventory planning methods and things like that. So hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.